Oh yeah, I think he's not back there yet. Oh, now here we go. All right. Excellent. Good evening, everyone. And apologies for the slight delay due to some technical difficulties as we get started on the first meeting of the City of Revere's first Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So it's our inaugural meeting. We plan on meeting monthly every second Wednesday at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers. And also there'll be a link posted to participate via Zoom as well for those that are interested. But really excited to be here to talk about such an important topic. So just to give a quick run through of how tonight is going to go. So first of all, my name is Joe Gravelisi. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust here in Revere, serving on behalf of Mayor Arrigo as his appointee. We have additional members that have been confirmed by the City Council, who we'll introduce shortly. And then in addition, Jerry Visconti, a City Council President, is a member of the Commission as the representative of the City Council. Unfortunately, he was unable to make it today, but he sends his regards, and we're excited to work with him when he's able to participate moving forward. So with that, I'll start with a brief roll call of the membership. Joe Gravelisi, I'm present. As I mentioned, Jerry Visconti, not here. Jan Dumas, not here. Layla Pietri. Deborah Frank. And Anayo, please pronounce your last name correctly.
Anayo Oswiki, present.
Fantastic, thank you. And so what I'll do briefly is I'm going to give a quick introduction and some background to the Affordable Housing Trust, but then I'm going to introduce someone who can speak to it more extensively than I can, our guest speaker tonight, Shelley Goring from the Mass Housing Partnership. But just to begin with, wanted to talk a little bit about what an affordable housing trust is and sort of why we're here and why we started one for the City of Revere. Affordable housing trusts are operated under the authority of a law passed by the state legislature in 2005, which simplified the ability for local governments to set up funds specifically for the purpose of preserving or creating affordable housing in the community. And really try to do it in ways that are maybe creative or unique or specific to the local community and that fit its needs. There are over 100 communities across Massachusetts that have affordable housing trusts. We enacted this ordinance last year, so now we've joined that group and we're excited to get started. Obviously, in Revere, we know that we're not immune to the housing crisis that's impacting Greater Boston, to the housing affordability crisis. Not only that, we're kind of at the epicenter of it, Revere and some of the communities that we neighbor. In addition to the general sort of pressure on rents and home prices all throughout the Greater Boston area, we're also seeing a big kind of significant increase in interest and investment in Revere. Always good and bad to everything, right? We've seen improvements in the quality of life in the city, which is great, increased business investment in the city, which is terrific, new jobs in the community. And also longtime residents have seen an increase in their home values, which obviously is great if you're a homeowner. On the flip side, obviously renters are feeling the squeeze of a significant increase in rent in recent years. Additionally, if you want to be a first-time home buyer in the community, it's becoming more and more difficult. I think you're seeing a lot of people are noticing that their kids or their grandkids aren't able to stay in Revere or in the region because they can't afford the increasing housing costs. Even if you own your own home, the increase in property values can be a double-edged sword, as you age in place. If you're on a fixed income, the increase in value sort of on paper might not necessarily do a lot for you, and you're feeling the pressures of maintaining your housing. And then, of course, the people that feel the greatest pinch are those at the lowest end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Folks that may face eviction, they may face homelessness, or they may face, having to not just leave Revere, but leave the region entirely, since Revere has been one of the sort of last bastions of a place where folks, whether they be longtime residents or immigrants or whatever the case may be, can find affordable housing, that they can kind of live on a working class income and be able to raise a family. So I always like to look at the good and not just the bad. I just listed a lot of challenges. But we also have opportunities. We have opportunities that are unique to Revere. We have a city that's been really managed in a very fiscally strong way. And you can see that in the fiscal health of the city and the finances each year and the budget surpluses that have existed. and also the increase in commercial investment in the city, creates an opportunity to do a lot of good things. There's also some leftover of some of the relief funds that exist. So now is a unique moment and a real opportunity for Revere to take some of what's been invested in the community, but make sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't leave people behind, and that does create opportunities for people. And that's kind of part of where we come in. There's a lot of things that the city needs to do. We're just one small piece of it on the Affordable Housing Trust. But that is kind of our role, is to be a piece of that. I'm going to have the other members introduce themselves before we bring in Shelley, but really quickly, I want to start each meeting with an update on the finances of the Affordable Housing Trust, which hopefully will see this number grow. We're starting off with a balance of $257,355. So the source of those funds came from a $100,000 initial deposit when the trust was set up. And then $157,000 or so, that was 10% of the city's free cash certified at the end of the previous fiscal year. We anticipate and are hopeful that that type of deposit will be repeated at the end of the fiscal year. If Jerry Visconti were here, I would, give him a nice nudge and remind him that we certainly would appreciate the city council's support for that. Shelley will talk about some of the ways that affordable housing trusts both raise and expend funds. But that's our starting point, so that can help kind of set some context for where we are. And so before we have our guest speak, maybe we'll just start with Layla at the end and kind of move from right to left. If each member wanted to just briefly state your name and maybe some of your background with this issue or why you felt like it was important and you wanted to serve.
My name is Layla Petrie. I live on Revere on 525 Bishop Street since 2014. And currently, I'm working for the Registry of Motor Vehicle. They have 17 years with the government of Massachusetts, and I belong to this. I decided to be part of the group, is to help our community. They have so many people that are during the COVID time. We suffer for the crisis, for the COVID. They lose their jobs, but I helped some families that are they improving during that time. So I think the Affordable Trust Fund is helping more our community and try to help the families that are for some reason they have to move from Revere that have long time living here. So that's the reason I decided to belong to this group.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve on this committee. My name is Anaya Osweki. I'm relatively new to Revere. I moved here about 2 years ago. I am very passionate about this idea of making home ownership affordable, which is the main driver for my interest here. I come from an area that home affordability is very important to raising your family, to community involvement, and just the love and attention you give to your family and your community really stems a lot from home ownership. Those are very important qualities that I believe. Now, as far as what I do, I'm an economist. I work at State Street. My role there is a quantitative economist. I focus mostly on modeling for commercial real estate or the balance sheets, etc. So again, I hope to employ my passion, interest, and technical abilities to this committee. Thank you again.
Thank you. My name is Deb Frank. I am not a resident of Revere. However, I work with Metro Credit Union as their mortgage business development vice president. I focus predominantly on low to moderate income borrowers. We do a lot of teaching. I personally do a lot of first-time home buyer seminars. I've been focusing lately on grants and down payment assistance programs, doing a lot of education in Revere, in all of the surrounding communities where Metro has branches to make sure that the individuals who want to become homeowners can actually become homeowners, whether it's today or in the future by proper planning. So my interest in being here is to continue to support the members of Revere and hopefully be able to participate in creating better homeownership opportunities for them.
Thank you. And then, as I mentioned, I'm Joe Gravelisi. had the honor of working for Mayor Arrigo and his administration during the first term as a member of the staff. Professionally, now I currently work as Director of Development for Heading Home, which is one of the leading providers of shelter housing, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing for folks experiencing homelessness or coming out of homelessness in Greater Boston. And also have worked extensively on the housing issue, both during my time in the administration and just as a citizen and resident. So excited and passionate about this issue and looking forward to working together. And with that, I've had the good fortune of being connected with Shelley Goring from Mass Housing Partnership. They've done wonderful work with affordable housing trusts all over the state. I sent around to the membership the handbook that they put together. If you haven't read it yet, please do. It's very good. But Shelley will take some time now to talk us through affordable housing trusts and how we can use it to the benefit of our community. So Shelley, take it away. Hopefully this works.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And so nice to be here with you. I'm hearing some interference, so I'm hoping that that's not going to come through for all of you. So I'm going to share my screen.
We hear you loud and clear.
With no little staticky in the background. Okay, so can someone just tell me, Joe, can you tell me if you can see the slides appropriately?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So my name is Shelley Goering, and I am with MHP, Mass Housing Partnership. And the reason I'm here is because a lot of my work is to support communities that either already have an affordable housing trust or are wanting to establish one. So a lot of my work is to help communities create trust, try to be more effective as affordable housing trusts. We do a lot of trainings. We have different online materials, and the guidebook is one material that we have for trust. So just a little bit about MHP. If you're not familiar with us, we are a quasi-state agency in Massachusetts focused on increasing the supply of affordable housing across the state. And we have a few different legs to our stool that are how we do this. We have community assistance, which is the team that I'm a part of. And we work very intentionally in communities, also with nonprofit organizations and housing authorities to help increase the local capacity to support affordable housing. We have a lending team that's lent over $1.4 billion to support the creation and preservation of over 27,000 units of housing. Our niche really is to support affordable rental housing. We have a homeownership program, actually a homeownership team. And a core product of ours is the One Mortgage product. It's really the most affordable mortgage product in the state for households earning up to 100% of the area at median income. It's for first-time home buyers, fixed interest rate over 30 years. Some of you may be familiar with the product. And then our Center for Housing Data is a team of folks that collect, analyze, and share information to help inform effective housing policy on the local, regional, as well as state level. So tonight, I am just wanting to go through a few things. One, just some basics about affordable housing trusts, specifically municipal affordable housing trust funds. Get into a little bit about operations and best practices, just some of the things that we've learned working in many different communities. So some suggestions that we have for you as you get started. And then lastly, I'll go and dig into some of the eligible activities, the kinds of things that your trust could be investing in. I just want to let you know that if you want to interrupt me at any point, if you have questions, if something's not clear, if I'm speaking too quickly, please interrupt me. We don't have to wait till the end. I'm perfectly happy with that. And I was going to have some earbuds in, but for some reason they're not working tonight. And so I'm sorry if you hear my toddler in the background. I'm hoping that that won't be a distraction. So first, the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund, it's organized under Chapter 44, Section 55C. Your board is a public entity, and some of this you likely already understand, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. It was created by your local legislative body. The purpose is to create and preserve affordable housing for low and moderate income households. So some communities want everything housing to go under the trust, but I just urge you to be mindful that it really isn't a catch-all. It's really about creating and preserving affordable housing. And it's led by you, the Board of Trustees that are appointed locally. And because you're a municipal entity, you are subject to public procurement, designer selection, conflict of interest, and public meeting laws like all of your other boards. So very broadly, a housing trust can really focus on addressing affordable housing needs in the community. The board is only focused on that. So for some communities that have the Community Preservation Act, hopefully Revere will have it one day, they are focused on 4 different categories, 4 different areas, but the trust is all about affordable housing. So you hopefully, even though you're volunteers, hopefully you'll be able to dig in a little bit. You can support some local controlled housing initiatives. So many of our trusts are actually initiating programs such as emergency rent assistance during the pandemic. You can engage in real estate activity. The trust can be buying and selling real estate if that's appropriate. You can make timely decisions because the trust is set up to be able to have funds in your account and to not have to go to city council for decisions unless there were some restrictions put in your ordinance, your particular ordinance. So you just want to make sure that you're not just looking at state statute, but that you're also paying attention to how the Revere ordinance was written as well. And then as a municipal entity, you can be collecting funds from a variety of sources, and I'll cover the creative ways that communities are funding their trusts these days. So the statute says just at a minimum 5 members to the board. Again, you'll want to make sure that you're rehearsed in your local ordinance to see the any additional guidance that is there. But the statute, the state statute, says that the CEO of the community should be included on the trust, and members are appointed by the mayor. Depending on your form of city, the city council may need to confirm the appointees. You have 2-year terms, and you're considered public agents for the purposes, a special municipal employee. So the statute offers a variety of different powers, and these are just some of the big ones: accepting and receiving real property, purchasing and retaining real personal property, selling, leasing. Again, you just want to make sure that you read through your ordinance. In some cases, some communities might add an additional layer. They might require a 2/3 vote for certain powers. They might require something to go through the city council. So you just want to make sure that you're clear about what Revere allows for your board. And then some of the things that we're learning, this is not rocket science. The trusts that are the most effective tend to have money in their account. They have a vision, a clear sense of what their role is in the community and what they're working on. They have leadership that can help move things forward. And there's transparency, openness in the community about what they're working on and their priorities. So first is the money. And a really encouraging thing has been to see how many different funding sources communities are accessing for their affordable housing trusts. It is true that the Community Preservation Act is the most common source of funds, but it's not a given in every community. About 76% of our trust communities also have CPA. It might actually be a little bit lower than that, but it's right around 76%. But it's not a given in every single community. It's not necessarily an annual resource in every community either. Another source is with inclusionary zoning. Many communities having an inclusionary zoning bylaw or ordinance. There may be an in lieu of payment that a developer can contribute instead of perhaps building on site, an affordable unit on site or units on site. In some cases, those funds are directed to the Affordable Housing Trust. We have communities like Revere. I was really happy to hear that free cash has already been directed to your trust. We have other communities that have done that, like Truro, Brookline. We have tax title sales. So some communities may have income from tax title sale properties that are sold. Or in some cases, like Chelsea, your neighbor, they have actually transferred some parcels that the city acquired through tax title takings. They've transferred to the trust, and the trust is working to dispose of them for affordable housing development. And one of my colleagues is actually working with Chelsea right now on one particular site. I believe they've released a request for proposals. We have communities that have negotiated fees with developers. This is something you need to be really careful with how you do. But we did have, before the housing crisis, we had a community in the, it was actually Norfolk. And they had a friendly 40B development with a local developer, and it was a homeownership development. And the developer contributed $10,000 from each market rate unit that was sold to the community, and the community directed those funds to their housing trust. We have one community on the Cape that has a cell phone tower, and the payments from the lease are directed to their trust. It's not a lot of money, but it's, $50,000 every year. We have some communities that are actually using short-term rental fee income. Brewster is an example of that. Gloucester is another example. We have other communities that are trying to leverage those funds from the local community. We have our first community that has passed a municipal bond. Medfield created a trust a few years ago, and then they actually bonded $1 million against their budget. They don't have CPA, so they bonded it against their municipal budget for the trust to use. And then we have Orleans on the Cape has passed a tax override that they see as a permanent tax override, but it's $275,000 that is directed to their trust each year. And because of that kind of flow of cash, they, for access, they're the only trust that I know of that's been able to access a line of credit with the bank because of those kinds of steady funds. Donations are possibilities. Land, a building, cash could be donated. And then you likely know that there's legislation trying to allow for real estate transfer fees. There are individual bills for individual communities. There's also a statewide enabling legislation. So we'll see if that passes. And there might be special bylaws or ordinance payments that could be directed to the trust. So there's, and marijuana tax gets talked about. I don't yet know of any community that's actually utilizing those funds. But what we are seeing though is that communities are just trying to be more and more creative to access funds for affordable housing. It's typical just to have an account through your municipal treasurer, just a municipal account. That's typically how it's done. So as a new trust getting started, we would encourage each trustee to become familiar with the housing needs in Revere. So you likely have a sense of that. But we would encourage you to start by going through the housing section of your master plan. You're in a little bit of a challenging space just because last I heard this plan hasn't been formally adopted by the city, but because there was a process and MAPC, your regional planning agency, they did some work for you. I would encourage you to be reading through this if you haven't. It also outlines some suggested goals. And given that you're a new trust getting started and you're having some staff changes with your planning and community development department, it could also be a great time for you to suggest that the city embark on a housing production plan or a more comprehensive and current housing needs analysis, some kind of current plan right now that you can be engaged with. And that might also kind of include kind of an eye towards helping to identify some goals and priorities for the trust. It could be a good time for you to initiate that along with your community development department. Another resource that you can use is DataTown. It's a website that MHP has created. It gives data points, valuable data points for every community in the Commonwealth. There's also a tool that can allow you to compare different communities. So these are just two graphs. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but on the left is a graph that just shows the mix of housing type in Revere. So you have a nice mix of large developments, smaller multifamily developments, and single family as well. On the right, it shows some of your housing costs, your challenges with the housing costs in Revere. So the top numbers are for renters. This shows that about 50% of your renters are cost burdened and 28.5%, so almost 30% of your renters are paying over 50% of their gross income on housing. And on the bottom, it's for homeowners. So it's 15.6% of your homeowners are paying more than about that, are paying more than 50% of their gross income. So it's pretty common that renters are more distressed in communities than homeowners, but both of these numbers are important to be aware of and be planning around a little bit. So it always encourage trust to start with understanding the needs in the community, identifying the needs in the community. So if a housing need plan is getting dated, to update that, and then to spend some time really digging in and reading it and talking about that as a team. And then starting to work on setting priorities, goals, and some strategies to reach your goals, and to consider that you're a volunteer board. The housing needs in all of our communities are significant. So we really encourage trust to try to identify a few things that you're going to really start focusing on. Sometimes communities try to bite off a lot, and they can end up spinning their wheels because it's overwhelming and there just are never enough resources. So we really encourage you to dig into the needs, and then from the needs to pick a few things to focus on. You could also establish a benchmark or benchmarks if you wanted. You don't have to do this, but Somerville's trust ordinance, actually in the ordinance, it outlines a percentage of funds that should be spent on at certain area median incomes. So it's kind of a benchmark essentially, that they want a portion of their funds to go towards the lowest income households, but also at different AMI levels. They want to be reaching a variety of incomes. So you could set benchmarks if it made sense, if there was a particular need that you really wanted to focus on, but you certainly don't have to do that. And part of these initial months, we encourage you to create a mission statement for your trust to help focus you, but also to indicate to the community how you're seeing your role within Revere. And I just pulled a couple off of websites. On the left is Brewster. And so they identify a particular need for them, that they're focusing on expanding and preserving year-round rental and ownership homes. So of course we know on the Cape that ends up being very much of a seasonal housing market, and that is a challenge for a lot of their residents. So they're really calling out that they're focused on year-round rental housing, as well as a welcoming environment for demographically and socioeconomically diverse populations. So they're just right on the top calling out that they're focused on creating a welcoming environment for anyone to feel comfortable making Brewster their home. In Amherst, I'll just point out that they are reminding the community that the trust is an instrument of town government. So just reminding people that it's a part of government, that their job is to help work collaboratively with the town to implement housing goals. So I'd encourage you to take some time to work on establishing a mission for your work. And then the next step with that is to do some work to create guidelines, outline goals, create a strategic plan. It looks different in different communities. On the left is just pulled from Beverly's guidelines that they've created for their trust. So they finished their housing plan when they created their trust and they appointed trustees. They dug into the housing plan to learn the current needs in the community. And then they created guidelines for how their trust was going to operate, how they were going to structure their allocations, their funding allocations. They outlined the priority things that they want to invest in. And then they created an application process. And this is easily found on their trust webpage. You can access if you want to use it as a resource, but they did that in-house. So they had some capacity with their planning and community development department that helped them create these guidelines. On the right-hand side is Amherst. They hired a consultant and they did a full-blown 5-year strategic plan. Some trusts call them action plans. So it just depends on kind of the bandwidth within the community, how much planning has already been done, the preferences of the people involved. But we would encourage you to take some time to do some of this kind of groundwork. So as an example, Beverly created a trust at the beginning of a calendar year and appointed their trustees. They finished their housing plan. They worked on their guidelines, and then they didn't release, they ended up at the end of that calendar year releasing a notice of funds available or a NOFA, but they took several months to do this groundwork to really create a structure for the trust and just to establish how they were going to function. And I point that out because we see so many times that trusts try to just jump in. And what typically ends up happening is that they end up just spinning their wheels, not knowing where to start and really struggling with doing anything. And I would just encourage you to do some of this groundwork and to really set things up for yourselves so that you can focus in on some key areas that you want to invest in and that you can be able to articulate that in the broader community. And I'm using this example from Wellfleet because oftentimes when our trust boards establish goals, they're very, very vague. They're very general. And it also contributes to challenges among the trust of how to actually move forward to meet goals. The Wellfleet is a new municipal affordable housing trust. They had a previous kind of housing trust that wasn't all that effective. They transferred it into a municipal trust. And then they did some work. This is a very new trust. They did some work to narrow down these 2 core goals that are very specific. They're SMART goals. They're measurable goals. So 1, create 100 units of low, moderate income rental and homeownership units, housing units over the next 5 years. So Wellfleet is a tiny little community on the Lower Cape. And so 100 units over 5 years for a community as small as theirs. I don't remember the population offhand, but it's quite small. It's a good, ambitious goal for them. And then they have this A through E that are strategies of how they're gonna reach that goal. The next step that they'll need to do is create tasks, specific tasks for each strategy, but they have very well-defined, a well-defined roadmap for their next few years. And then their second goal is to raise $1 million annually between 2022 and 2027 for a total of $5 million. And then again, they have A through D. They have 4 different strategies of how they're going to try to do that. And for the community as small as they are, this amount of money is very ambitious. They're pushing themselves. But I just want to reiterate that when you are talking about goals, try to make them as specific as possible, that make them measurable, and then make sure that you add strategies of how you're going to reach those goals. It'll make your the coming months and years much, much easier. And it also makes it easier to articulate to the community, to the city about what you're working on. In many cases, communities have multiple entities that are working on affordable housing initiatives or strategies, and we would encourage you, if that's the case, which you likely have a housing authority and other boards that might be working on pieces that that add to affordable housing. We would urge you to start the conversations now, early, about understanding each other's roles and identifying different strategies and then who is taking the lead on them. This is just a tool that was used in Hingham in their housing plan of identifying different housing strategies, short-term, midterm, long-term, and then the responsible party. So not only does it help with just early communication, making sure that you're not duplicating or stepping on toes, but then it also adds some accountability for the different entities of who's taking the lead on different things. So it can look different in different communities, but we would encourage you as you're kind of figuring out your role and what you're going to be focusing on, that you're communicating with other entities. It could include nonprofit organizations that work in Revere as well, just to make sure that you're not duplicating unnecessarily, that you're building relationships with other entities that are interested and engaged in housing, that you're building the trust among different stakeholders in Revere. And then be transparent with the work that you're doing. You know, we all know that affordable housing in particular can be controversial, and Revere has experienced a lot of development recently. So I don't know what the broader climate is around development, but make sure that you're communicating, that you're reporting back to the boards that you identify as critical. And when you invest in different developments and programs, promote those. Use the webpage. You're already doing that, and you already have some good information. So build on that. Don't make it difficult for people in Revere to understand what the trust is all about, who sits on the board. I think that's not yet on the website. If a staff person ends up being kind of assigned to help support the trust, have that person's information there. You already have a link to the ordinance, which is fantastic, and some other resources, but just don't make it difficult for people to learn what you're about, the work that you're doing, what you're investing in. If there's a vacuum, people can make up their own stories. We just don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to own the work that you're doing and feel good about it. And in all of these steps that I've been talking about, we encourage trust to allow for a public engagement element. So as you're working on a mission statement, working on goals, working on the things that you want to focus on, we would encourage you to have a conversation with people who are interested in the community. If that, maybe that's an evening where you're presenting the mission statement that you're working on and the goals that you're starting to identify, and allowing some feedback and some conversation. But the more that you early on include other people, the more that they'll want to support the work that you're doing. And then lastly is to have a bit of a conversation around how you want to operate as an affordable housing trust fund board. In some communities, they would like to just have money in their account and review applications and decide which developments or programs they want to fund. So like a foundation, kind of that model. In other communities, the trust is initiating different developments as well as programs. So as I said before, during the pandemic, it was oftentimes the Affordable Housing Trust that initiated local emergency rent assistance. We're also seeing more trusts engaged in disposing of municipal land for affordable housing. Sometimes the sites are transferred. Municipal site is transferred to the trust, such as what's happening in Chelsea, and some other communities have done that. In many cases, the trust is just actively engaged in the effort, the pre-development work, the writing the request for proposals, reviewing applications. And then we have communities, the trust, that really want to be a part of advocacy in the local community. It may be advocating for other policies that will support affordable housing development. It may be advocating for developments that didn't come to the trust for funding, but that include affordable housing and that the trust members think is an asset, would be an asset for the community. And in some communities, the trust wants to do a combination of these or all of these things. And I would just suggest that you have this conversation early so that there's clarity among each of you, and also clarity in the community. Perhaps if you end up writing some kind of guidelines, putting it in there as well, just so that there's openness and clarity about how you're going to function as a board. So I wanted to take a breath, and I can't see any of you, but if Joe, at this point, if you want to interrupt, if there's questions, or if I should just keep plugging through.
I will ask a brief question. In terms of sort of governing documents outside of the ordinance, bylaws or things like that, is there a formal format that those need to take hold? I mean, I've read Beverly's guidelines and they're terrific and they're really extensive. I think ours will probably be maybe a little bit more bare bones to start with. But what maybe should that look like in terms of just bylaws?
It just depends. It's just different in every community. Some communities may not be as extensive as Beverly's. At the same time, if you're going to be entertaining proposals, if that's going to be your model, then you do want to have some kind of application process. Mm-hmm. And if you're wanting applications to really reflect your priorities, then you want to have some of that work done before you would accept any applications. But it just looks different in every community. Some communities, like Brewster on the Cape, they have come up with, it's much simpler kind of goals. They don't have the extensive format that Beverly has. However, you can look at Beverly's and you can borrow some of that. You don't have to totally recreate everything. Particularly like their application and that. But it just looks different in every single community. There is no standard.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
First of all, thank you, Shelley. This is Anaya Oswiki. Thank you for this presentation. It was quite comprehensive but concise, very good material, and if you could share that would be great. I have two questions that deal with the one actually specifically is a timeline. you mentioned lots of important milestones such as mission statement, coordination between and within the organizations, and also the execution of goals. Do you have a general sense of what is a reasonable timeline to expect an organization, a committee who's just started like now to meeting these milestones? The second question I have is there a coordinating body of different trusts? I know you talked a lot about specific accomplishments or achievements from these various different trusts you work with, but is there a way for us to learn best practices from these organizations that are existing now? Or does your organization serve that role in some capacity? Thank you.
Yep. So in terms of a timeline for getting started, so the reason why I did want to bring up Beverly as another city, and even though they do have a planning community development department, so they had some capacity, they still took a good 6 months to do some of this kind of initial groundwork of finishing their housing plan, really understanding the housing needs. They actually invited a couple nonprofit developers to sit with their trust to talk through a development pro forma, to help the trustees understand how does a developer that builds affordable housing need the local funds to be structured, and what is the timeline, what are the pressures that the developer faces. So just to help teach the trustees about the process for financing affordable housing. And then they created their guidelines. And so they took at least a good 6 months to do some of that work before they even considered accepting applications. So for some people it feels like such a long time to do 6 or 9 months, but the reality is that it's over in a blink. And I think the more thorough and thoughtful you are getting started, the smoother sailing down the road. So I would suggest maybe 6 to 9 months. And for some communities, it might need to be longer than that.
Well, and the other quick question I have is
Coordinating body.
Coordinating body. Is there
Yep.
a way for us to? There's an entity that serves as a coordination between the different trusts, or does the organization serve that role?
So unfortunately, there is no coordinating body, unlike the Community Preservation Act communities where there's a statewide community preservation coalition. It's like a trade group, trade association for the CPCs, the local communities. The trust, we don't have anything like that in the state. So MHP tries to fill some with some trainings and support, but there's no central place where trust communities have to report or, so we believe that there are 135 trusts in the state right now, but there may be more because there's just no requirement for reporting. So we have a variety of different trainings on the Housing Toolbox that are geared towards trusts and CPC communities as well. So there are a variety of different stories from different communities, presentations. We can also help connect you with different communities if we have a little bit of insight of kind of the kinds of activities or communities that you might be most interested in. We have the guidebook that has some examples in the back of the book, but there isn't it's not like there isn't a more structured kind of coordinating body, unfortunately.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I have a question. And related with the inclusionary zoning, how we can handle on the city?
So I don't know I think that Revere, I don't actually know if Revere has inclusionary zoning.
It does not. Yeah.
Does not yet. So I think it's been a part of a conversation that the city's having, but that would be a change to your zoning. So it wouldn't be directly something that the trust would do, although the trust may support it. And I can't speak specifically to the process. I'm not actually a planner, but it would be a change to your zoning, and it would likely be driven by your planning and community development department, I believe.
We do have a planner here. I won't put you on the spot. I know that this is something that had come up previously before the city council and ultimately would be a vote of the city council.
Yes.
we haven't formally, begun that work as a board as to what we think our role might be in advocating for that or not. Obviously, for a lot of communities, that is a huge source of their funding, is inclusionary zoning, and the fees that, may come along with that. But that's not something that we have in our toolbox at this time.
Yeah.
For folks that are not familiar with that phrase, what is inclusionary zoning?
Sure. So I can give the explanation, but would you mind if I put you on the spot? I'm going to call, and this is my first time meeting you, so come on, sit down. How do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry. Skorowski. Tom Skorowski, the new Director of Planning and Community Development for the city. If you could just briefly explain sort of what inclusionary zoning is, how it works, but then also, since we don't have it right now, maybe, how voluntary contributions to affordable housing work sometimes with developers and agreements.
Sure. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I look forward to working with this group. This trust fund doesn't have a dedicated staff capacity, but certainly the Community Development and Planning Department will play a very active role in this, given that everything you are talking about is really core to the mission of what we do. To answer the question specifically with inclusionary zoning, so it's basically creating an element of your zoning ordinance which really governs land use throughout the city that states any housing development of a certain scale that takes place in the city, a certain percentage of that has to be dedicated to be deed restricted affordable housing. So I do understand prior to my time, I believe in August of this year, a proposal had come in front of the city council for inclusionary zoning. And I want to say it was 12 to 15% of units above, I think the threshold was eight or more units. I might be wrong there. Again, I wasn't here at the time, but my understanding was that was voted down. And one of the thoughts that came out in the meeting is that there already is a fund called the Community Investment Trust. We call it CIT here locally, which basically takes a percentage of the building permit fee and allocates it specifically towards a fairly open-ended set of criteria that funds can be spent towards. They're basically, in essence, an impact payment. And this goes both for residential and commercial projects. And affordable housing is one of the things that those funds can be spent on. And that potentially could be a source of revenue for this trust fund moving forward.
You kind of answered my question before I got a chance to ask it, which I'm glad, which is, I know the CIT, there's some leverage around how those funds are used. I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that cities and towns can use those funds directly through sort of allocation by the city council to support affordable housing if they want to, or they can do a number of other things with it, which, Revere has done. But are there examples of, or could the council allocate, a portion of CIT funds to the Affordable Housing Trust?
I think they absolutely could.
And Shelley, I don't know if you might have a better answer to that as well.
I don't. I think that was a great response.
Good thing to explore and think about, since I do know that, I'm not sure what the balance is, but I know that there's been a pretty considerable amount of those impact fees, that have come in over the course of development in the community.
I'm still learning, what the balance is and all of that, but it is a considerable sum. And again, it is one of the criteria laid out in the ordinance that affordable housing is an eligible use.
Great. Shelley, apologies for kind of going off track a little bit of what we were talking about, but does anyone else have questions either on that topic for Tom or for Shelley for what she had discussed so far? Or I know that you were going to give some case studies, Shelley, so we can move on to that piece unless other folks have questions. Tremendous. All right, take it away. Back to the slides.
Okay, so just wanted to give you some ideas of the kinds of things that you could be investing in. And I'm using the verbs acquire, create, preserve, support. These come out of the Community Preservation Act. Statute is a language used as CPA, and I do that because so many communities with trust do have CPA, but also because the trust statute was modified a few years ago. So
it now ties these two statutes together. So all of the allowable uses under community housing with CPA are eligible activities for the trust. So before that happened, there was the support category with CPA that wasn't specifically called out as an allowable use for trust funds. And now everything that's allowed under CPA is allowed for a trust. So the examples that I'm going to give, some of them were actually technically funded by the local community preservation committee, but every example that I'm giving are things that your trust could invest in. So the first is an example of acquiring. So this was an existing apartment complex in Barnstable that I believe was originally permitted under Chapter 40B, where only a portion, 25% were affordable originally. And in 2011, a nonprofit developer, POA, was able to use some local funds, so $500,000, to leverage additional resources to buy the whole apartment complex of 124 units. And now almost all of the units have an affordability deed restriction. There were a few households that were not income qualified and they didn't want to displace anyone. So a few units are market rate, but the majority of them, using just $500,000 of local funds, the majority are now affordable in perpetuity in Barnstable. So an example of acquiring existing housing to create affordable housing. We have a variety of affordable housing trusts that have some kind of small scale homeownership program. They're oftentimes referred to as buy down programs. It's helping people who are income qualified access existing housing in the community. These programs are take professional management. They're very expensive per unit, and communities that have these kind of programs just do not add more than 2 or 3 units a year. But in some communities, it's a way to help with homeownership, helping people access existing homes. In some of our communities where there's tear down issues of tearing down modest homes to build huge ones, it's a way to preserve some of the more naturally affordable housing. But this is just, and there are a lot of different ways to structure these, many, many different ways. But this is Sudbury's model, is that they identify a home that's a more modest home that's coming on the market. They negotiate a sale price with the seller. They run a lottery to see who's qualified and interested in buying it. So their program is for households earning up to 80% of the area at median income. They work with the state, so with the local action unit program. So these are added to the subsidized housing inventory for Sudbury. And then at the time of sale, the trust puts in the difference between the negotiated sale price and what makes the unit affordable to a household earning 80% of the area at median income. Last I heard, that was over $225,000. It's probably might be significantly more now, but so it's a lot of subsidy per unit, and they don't add more than 1 or 2 units a year. But we have several trusts that run this as a piece of the larger work that they're doing. Under CREATE, we have many examples of trusts investing in the creation of new affordable housing. This is an example in Beverly. The nonprofit organization Harborlight, they have actually just renamed themselves, and I forgot to update the slide, and I'm forgetting offhand what their new name is. But this is a development of 77 units of rental housing. The city did designate this area as a 40R district, so a smart growth district, working with DHCD with the state. These 77 units are 2 and 3 bedroom. They've reserved 15 for homeless families. Beverly is a part of a Tri-City, has a Tri-City pact with Salem, as well as, I believe it's Peabody, where each of the cities are committed to supporting housing to meet the needs of homeless families. So this is a reflection of Beverly's commitment to that. The units have a 60% ceiling, 6% AMI, area median income. That tells you that there are low-income housing tax credits in the deal. And their Community Preservation Committee contributed funds. Their trust also contributed funds to this development. And it's broken ground. It's being developed. It's actually this building. You can see that it's been completed this last summer. This is an example of community driven. So in Norwell, they had a police station that they declared surplus. They transferred the site to their Affordable Housing Trust. And then the trust did some initial due diligence. They wrote a request for proposals and released it. They reviewed proposals from developers, chose the nonprofit Metro West Collaborative Development.
There are now 18 units of age-restricted housing, so senior housing, 1 and 2 bedrooms. Most of them are affordable at 80% of the area at median income, a few are at 100%. And between their trust and their CPC, they put in $1.2 million to invest in this development. So this one was really led by the community. There are multiple examples of reusing existing buildings for affordable housing. Sometimes there's a historic component, not always. Sometimes they're municipal, sometimes they're private. So in Middleborough, had been a shoe factory in Middleborough, and a couple nonprofits were able to partner and redevelop the site into 25 units of rental housing. And it says family housing. That just means that it's not age restricted. So anyone who's income qualified could apply. In the middle is Stevens Corner in North Andover. This had been a nursing home that a nonprofit acquired and then used some local funds to leverage state and federal resources. And they now have 42 units of, again, rental, non-age restricted housing. And then the McCon, the school in Swampscott, it had been a public school. They disposed of it for affordable housing. A nonprofit was chosen as the developer, and it now has 38 units of age-restricted housing, so senior housing. There are many examples of schools being reused as housing, both affordable as well as market rate. So sometimes this kind of development can be less controversial than new construction, but there's also the added benefit of oftentimes bringing an underutilized building back online. And then with preservation, when we talk about preservation, we're typically talking about preserving the affordability restriction on units. Many times, based on the financing, they might have only 15-year affordability or 20, sometimes maybe 30. So some trusts are paying attention to, it's oftentimes referred to as expiring use. They're paying attention to restrictions that are set to expire and then engaged in the conversation of how to maintain affordability. This case in Amherst was a development of 204 units. 41 of those apartments were affordable. And you likely know Amherst has multiple schools, particularly UMass Amherst, and it puts incredible pressure on their rental market because of all the students in the community. The financing for this development was only set with 15-year restrictions, and it was set to expire. The developer, the owner at the time, did not want to extend the affordability. The community was very concerned about this. So they engaged with MHP, and the decision was they reached out to a developer, Beacon Communities, that has extensive experience in affordable housing, multifamily housing development, Chapter 40B, low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. And Beacon actually negotiated with the owner at the time to purchase the development. The local community, Amherst, decided to bond CPA funds. So a trust, you would not be able to bond your funds with a trust because a trust just doesn't have the kind of consistent funds. So in this case, it's not the best example for you, but they bonded $1.25 million to assist Beacon in purchasing, and now those units are restricted in perpetuity. So the example more is that one thing that you may want to do as a trust is to help monitor any expiring affordability on your units and to be engaged in the conversation of extending affordability on those units. And then under support, there are a variety of things that have fit under support under the Community Preservation Act. One is if there's a municipal site that you're interested in seeing affordable housing built on, but you're not sure about the feasibility, the trust could potentially use some of your resources to do some initial pre-development work on those sites. Housing plans, trust funds could be used to update housing plans so you are understanding the needs in the community. And then rental assistance is explicitly called out in the CPA statute as an allowable use. So many communities, as I've said, the trust have used some of their funds for rental assistance. And then just to wrap up, because I know that I'm trying to be sensitive to the time, just to wrap up, reminders of to really, as you're starting your work, to consider your local infrastructure, consider the needs that are in the community, and also consider the resources as you're figuring out what your role is going to be in the community. And then develop goals that reflect identified needs. So I would really encourage you to be, again, reviewing the work that MAPC did for you in your master plan. Consider updating some of that work and basing what you do on some of the identified needs. It's easy to for people in our communities to make assumptions about what the needs are. And sometimes that's based on bias or preference, we really urge you to ground your work in data, and then be real about your capacity. You're a volunteer board. The needs are great. Be practical about what you can do, and it's always better to do a few things well than to do a lot of things really poorly. So we also have a lot of different resources. These are some online resources. Datatown, which I had talked about earlier. The Housing Toolbox has information about trusts and affordable housing finance and zoning, all kinds of stuff. And then the guidebook that I know that Joe's already sent out. And you should see us as a partner for you and as a resource. Joe has these slides in PDF. I've told him he can post them, he can send them out to you. Feel free to reach out to me. You don't have to go through Joe. You can reach out directly to me if you have questions, and I'm happy to be here with you supporting your work. I'm going to turn it back to Joe.
Yeah, well, Shelley, I just first of all just want to say thank you. That was very comprehensive, really helpful. I think it helps set context in a few different directions. First of all, in terms of what we can do, which is great. It also, quite frankly, sets some realistic context for us about what some of these programs and projects cost compared to what we have in our fund, right? And what, I think two of the things that we need to think about moving forward are sort of on current trajectory, what are the funds that we're going to have available and what are we going to be able to do with them, which is going to be much smaller in scale and scope than some of the things that we talked about. But then also maybe what are some of the strategies for growing that revenue, for trying to get some more funds there, and what would we do with kind of a bigger pool to work with. So I think we're in a position where we need to have those two conversations kind of simultaneously. I think I am a fan of taking the patient approach, especially for that reason, kind of to Shelley's point about wanting to really take the time to spend several months of these first meetings of really planning and thinking, engaging, because as much as I want to, and I'm sure you all want to, kind of start using what we have and kind of getting funds out the door and making things happen, we're not in a position to really make a huge dent in the problem right now. Whereas if we really think things through and plan it out, then maybe we can be. So we should be doing a lot of information gathering, in the coming months. I'll move on to kind of talking about a few things in that sense in just a moment, but I do want to see if anyone, before we let Shelley go, has any other questions or comments on her presentation. Shelley, well, thank you for joining us. You're free to go, since I know you mentioned you have a toddler at home, so we're very grateful that you took time out of your evening for that, although maybe it was a nice break, I don't know.
Thank you so much. The only thing I want to leave you with, Joe, is that try not to be too discouraged about how much money you have. The local funds in a development are always a tiny fraction of the total development costs, but they're seen as local support of the development, and that's what the developer needs to take to the state and federal funds. And some of the developments, I should put the number on, like the Middleborough project, 25 units, they only contributed $30,000. So there also is an acknowledgement of how much funds exist, and there are other ways that a community can support developments too. So try not to get too discouraged or caught up in the numbers. There are still so much that your trust will be able to do to move the needle in Revere. But thank you for letting me be here, and I know that we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate it. So moving on to the next agenda item, I wanted to block off, and being mindful of the time, just a little bit of time for us to maybe offer some sort of big picture commentary. I don't expect that we're going to get into brass tacks today of, what our goals are going to be, what the mission statement is, how we're going to allocate funding, et cetera. I want to maybe use this time for people to just react a little bit to what they've read and what they've heard, and start shaping that conversation. So to me, I come out of the reading that we've done and the presentation with a few things that I think we need to be thinking about over the next couple of months. First of all, that mission statement, like Shelley mentioned, is something that, we can start thinking about and working on. Obviously, closely related to that, what our goals are. This is going to be an important and I think difficult process because honestly, as I mentioned in sort of the beginning, when you look at what are the challenges that we face in terms of affordable housing, there's a lot of them, right? We have, run down the list. We could talk about seniors that are homeowners that are, facing the squeeze of property taxes, renters that are facing the squeeze of rent increases, either in the middle income, that maybe can't stay, or at the lower income that might be at risk of homelessness. Folks that are trying to become first-time home buyers. Pick your demographic. There's a challenge there kind of across the board, and we're not going to be able to address all of them. I don't have the right answer as to where we want to focus, but in order to be effective, we're going to have to really think through kind of which of the challenges we want to focus on and think that we can be most effective in dealing with. So that's just a big picture thing. Maybe I'd want to put out there for folks to chew on. Once we hone in on those things, then we can start getting into what our processes should be. How would we go about both trying to acquire funds and then also how to solicit proposals and how to use them. Obviously, we want to make sure that that's a really tight process that's really thoughtful and fair. And then on a more mechanical level, we'll want to maybe at the next meeting have officers, a secretary, a treasurer, a vice chair, just to help with administration of what we're doing. We also have at least 2 vacancies, by the way, if anyone's watching at home. Or if you know folks that might be a good candidate for the mayor to nominate, as it would be great to fill the board. I think we have, I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3 vacancies, but we definitely have vacancies, and we definitely could use additional expertise and help that folks can offer. The other thing that I really want to make sure that we do in the first few meetings is continue to have guests like Shelley. And I've already engaged with some folks that I know in the housing space that I think might have interesting things to share with us. I'd love actually to hear from our counterparts in Chelsea, who I don't know, but I'm going to get to work and reaching out for them because I'd love to hear about the project Shelley mentioned, where they were, utilizing some of that city property, as part of bringing more affordable housing online. So lots of things that we can do, and that's something that maybe we can all think about is, okay, if there's an area of the affordable housing kind of world that we want to explore, who would be a good speaker to come in and talk with us and share their experiences? Because I think we're going to be doing a lot of fact-finding. So with that, that's kind of how I view how we're going to spend our first few meetings. I think in between now and our next meeting, we can maybe think through and talk about what a mission statement might look like, and then kind of come together and work on it collaboratively in a meeting. But I want to let everyone else have their opportunity. So if folks want to just maybe offer some big picture thoughts on these topics, would love to hear it.
Hi, this is Anaya again. Thanks again for that. I share a lot of the sentiments you mentioned, and I agree with you, especially in terms of mission statement and process, et cetera. I think an important thing to consider is existing efforts already, and the extent to which that our efforts can align with whatever is going on instead of having to reinvent the wheel. And more to that effect, agencies within the municipalities that we can kind of reach out to again, announce our presence and then to coordinate tasks, objectives, however small, to supplement or to complement the existing efforts going on. And I guess, again, specifically I want to mention is that moving forward, actionable steps. Is there she mentioned earlier the idea of a master plan, or I know there is one, but is there a housing plan that we can sort of look at and sort of help us figure out our mission statements? And 2, what are the agencies, thank you again for coming, what are the agencies we can reach out to announce our interest and presence, et cetera?
Sure. I know that you're new, but I don't know if you want to offer a quick, thought on that.
Yeah, so on the second one, in terms of what agencies to partner with, I'm sure Joe would have a better sense of everyone else on the scene to connect with. But for what it's worth, with regard to my department, me specifically, what I'm doing over the next month is really engaging in a listening tour, meeting with people, talking about what their interests, needs, desires are for community development more broadly, and of course, in this case, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund specifically, I'd be happy to meet with any of you all. I think you all have my email now. Even if you just want to share ideas over email, if you don't have time to meet, I respect that. This is a volunteer board. I know you all have a lot to do. But I'm here as a resource. I'm also here to learn from you all, so we can have, as you mentioned, actions that are complementary to what the trust fund's doing. In terms of having a housing plan, we, prior to my time, had kicked around the idea of having a housing production plan, which is really all about creating a plan to help produce affordable housing in the city and increase our stock. Per Chapter 40B in Mass General Law, we're supposed to have 10% of our stock be affordable. It's at last count about 8%, and with all the new housing that we're having, very few of it which is affordable. It's probably even going to be lower than that soon. So we do need to get a housing production plan together. It's my intent to do that within the next year, and actually it sounds like it would be nice to couple with the work that you all are doing to help you all set your goals and action items moving forward. And so that's pretty much it on my end. I don't know if you have specifics about other committees to meet.
I want to say something. It's possible, and not just waiting until next meeting. We have to have another meetings to, about who created our goals, our guidelines. Not necessarily we have to wait until next meeting. It's a question.
No, no, but I'll do a quick, so we definitely should not wait to begin engaging with one another and talking about these things and thinking about what elements we'd want to include in a mission statement and in goals. We do need to be mindful that we are subject to the public open meeting law, so we can't have a quorum of members, discuss, making decisions or engaging in the business of the trust without it being a posted meeting. I am certainly open to, although being mindful of the fact that this is a volunteer board, so I don't want to, impose too much. But if we feel like maybe there's an opportunity to have a shorter conversation, just about the mission statement and goals between now and next month's regularly scheduled meeting, and we could do that just as a Zoom. As long as we post that publicly, that the members of the public would have a chance to engage and follow open meeting, we'd be able to do that just as a short meeting, just as a way to maybe make some progress between now and the next formal meeting. So I was going to propose that as an idea, but, only if everyone agrees, because I know that we all have busy schedules and appreciate everyone taking the time to fit this into it.
Okay.
So I have done a lot of work with MHP on the One Mortgage side, fabulous organization. In Chelsea, neighborhood developers, Green Roots, all the groups that they've worked with, we've connected with a lot. $260,000 is not a lot of money, so when you think about home ownership, I don't know that that's, as much as my passion is home ownership, I don't know that I would think that would be the proper place to start, just because you're not going to make a huge dent. And there are a lot of existing programs out there that can be utilized for the people in Revere. So, Mass Dreams grants, the other DPA assistance programs, the One Mortgage, mass housing programs, things like that. So there are certainly a lot of programs for low to moderate income buyers that can be utilized in Revere. And as you said, there's just so many different issues and places where we could go. So I think, the mission statement, the SMART goals, it has to be where we start to figure out where the need is, where the focus is.
For sure, and, obviously the hope and belief is that we'll be able to grow the fund, we'll be able to do more and more, but even if we start small, with goals, we can kind of achieve them and go from there. One way that obviously would be great to collaborate with the city, and kind of to your point, and to use that advocacy role that we might have as the Affordable Housing Trust, is to kind of amplify what types of programs exist that are out there, and that's something that, I'm not sure where that fits into your plans upstairs here. I know one of the things that was mentioned in the master planning process was sort of a housing stability office, or a different kind of city resources or point persons to help navigate people through that process of what programs and subsidies are available for home ownership. So definitely something that we can collaborate with you guys on. I don't know if that's something that's already in the works, or one of many things I'm sure on your plate as you get started.
We do have a housing stability officer. They currently work under my department. They'll be kind of shifting to another department soon, and a lot of their work has been more about working with folks that are housing insecure, that might be at risk of homelessness or might be homeless, to connect them with all the different resources that might be available. But to your point, you know, I don't know how many people in Revere know that there's a down payment assistance grant of up to $50,000 that only, right, that only, you know, citizens of gateway cities are eligible for it. So it's not everybody in the Commonwealth, and it's.
Well, it's more than that, because at this point, people that live in Revere are eligible for up to $50,000 from the Mass Streams grant, which is a pure
Right,
grant,
right.
plus another $50,000 through the Mass Housing DPA assistance.
Right.
So you can get up to $100,000 and make it affordable. And if they don't know that, you know,
Right.
we've got to get that word out.
For sure. And one of the things I'd love to explore too, particularly given the, let's face it, limited budget that we have, is what options might we have out there to use the funds that we have to leverage other funding that's out there. And that's like where some of your expertise is going to really come in handy, you know, being connected with banking, is if we can take $10,000 of assistance from the Affordable Housing Trust, but use that to unlock or funds or match funds that are available either through private sources or state sources or whatever the case may be, then all of a sudden that dollar goes a lot further. So I think as we put together our SMART goals, that's something to think about, is how can we leverage other funding sources that are available to do this kind of work. Other thoughts? No? Well, so the other two pieces I had on the agenda are other business for any late added agenda items, which I didn't get any. So if you intended to submit one, speak now or forever hold your peace. And then also open forum. There will be an opportunity at the end of all of these meetings for members of the public to address any of the topics that we address here at the Affordable Housing Trust. First meeting, no one's here, we don't take it personally, but if folks want to come out and speak in the future, you'll have the opportunity to do that, and you'll also have the opportunity on Zoom as well. And that is all. So I think before we move to adjourn, a couple of things. I will send around the resources that Shelley shared with us, the slideshow and presentation. I'll also make sure that we'll get these meeting minutes onto the website, and then just a summary of what happened to the local paper, just to make sure that folks are able to keep up with what's happening. I would encourage, and I'll talk with you all kind of one-on-one in the coming weeks, to start thinking about what those elements of the mission statement should be and kind of where we'd want to focus that mission statement for early goals. And then perhaps we may want to have a shorter, more informal meeting sooner than this, but the next scheduled meeting we'll have will be Wednesday, December 14th, the second Wednesday, at 6 p.m. So it'll be this same time every month, the second Wednesday at 6. So certainly appreciate the membership, just keeping that time blocked. I know that we all are busy. There will be the opportunity for remote participation as needed, although obviously we encourage folks to be here in person just to have that robust conversation. So any other final comments, thoughts? Otherwise, motion to adjourn? Any objection? Seeing none? There's the first meeting.